A racist police officer blatantly insults and threatens a black woman simply because of her skin color and gender. But, little does he know, this woman is a high-ranking Army colonel, a person not easily intimidated. When her identity is revealed, the officer's arrogance quickly turns into panic, and the situation takes a dramatic turn. This gripping story will take you from one surprise to another. Subscribe now to ensure you don't miss the shocking developments ahead. On a peaceful weekend afternoon in a small suburban neighborhood, Catherine Miller stepped into a supermarket, savoring a moment of relaxation after months of overseas deployment. Catherine, an African-American Army colonel, was known for her calm demeanor and decisiveness. She wasn't wearing her uniform, but instead opted for a simple outfit: a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers. With such a modest appearance, no one could have guessed that she was one of the most distinguished soldiers, dedicating her life to serving her country. As Catherine pushed her cart through the aisles, she enjoyed the simplicity of picking out the essentials herself. She cherished these ordinary moments after the intense demands of the battlefield. However, the tranquility was soon disrupted. From the far end of an aisle, Catherine spotted a tall man in a police uniform doing some shopping. Ethan Collins, a local police officer notorious for his arrogance, was standing in the middle of the aisle holding a pack of instant noodles and a bottle of soda. But instead of placing them into his cart, he casually dropped both onto the floor. Catherine stopped, narrowing her eyes in disbelief at what she had just witnessed. Ethan showed no intention of picking up the items he had dropped. He merely glanced at them indifferently before turning away. His lack of responsibility and dismissive attitude irritated Catherine. As someone trained in the military, Catherine deeply valued a sense of responsibility, even in the smallest actions. Unable to ignore what she had seen, she decided to step forward, ready to call Ethan out on his behavior. No one in the supermarket at that moment could have anticipated that this brief encounter would escalate into an incident that would stir the entire town. Catherine approached Ethan, her voice calm but clear. "Excuse me, sir. I think you dropped a few items. Perhaps you should pick them up so they don't inconvenience others." Ethan Collins, accustomed to behaving carelessly without facing consequences, turned around. He looked Catherine up and down, his gaze filled with arrogance. Instead of responding politely, Ethan smirked disdainfully, making his contempt clear. "Who do you think you are to tell me what to do? I don't have time for petty things like that." His attitude caused nearby shoppers to stop and glance curiously at the exchange. Catherine remained composed, but her voice took on a firmer tone, reflecting her seriousness. "You're a police officer. The uniform you wear represents the law and the community. You should set an example by doing even the smallest actions, like picking up what you dropped." Catherine's words were not just a reminder, but a lesson in responsibility. However, instead of understanding their meaning, Ethan reacted with defiance. Crossing his arms, his voice turned more caustic. "Oh, a woman like you is going to lecture me about morality? What do you know about the responsibilities of a police officer? Listen, I suggest you mind your own business before you embarrass yourself." Catherine sensed Ethan's mocking gaze and the sexism embedded in his words. But instead of getting angry, she took a deep breath to stay calm. Her military career had prepared her for challenges far greater than dealing with someone like Ethan. She continued, her voice strong, yet maintaining a tone of courtesy. "Picking up your items isn't just polite. It's a sign of respect for those around you. I don't want to argue with you, but you should remember that as a police officer, you must protect and set an example for the public, not the other way around." Ethan not only ignored her, but felt insulted by Catherine's firm words. He laughed loudly, intentionally raising his voice to draw more attention from those nearby. Set an example? Do you think I need a black woman like you to teach me anything? Listen here, I don't take orders from someone like you. You'd better keep quiet and stay out of my way before you get yourself into trouble. Ethan's discriminatory words created a tense atmosphere in the supermarket. Some people stepped back, while others discreetly took out their phones to record the scene. Despite feeling anger, Catherine maintained control of her emotions. She knew her. Actions reflected not just herself, but a greater message of standing firm against injustice. Looking directly into Ethan's eyes, she responded in a low but commanding voice. I suggest you think very carefully before you say anything else. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The confidence in her tone and the intensity in her gaze made Ethan momentarily uneasy, though he quickly masked it with a mocking smile. Dealing with who? Just an ordinary woman? Don't make me laugh. You can't do anything to me. The atmosphere grew still, and Catherine's sharp gaze cut through the silence. She didn't say another word, but her demeanor sent a clear message. She wasn't someone to be underestimated. The situation began to shift, and though Ethan wouldn't admit it, he was starting to feel like he was losing control in the face of this powerful woman. Ethan crossed his arms, his gaze full of defiance. Who do you think you are to lecture me? I don't need a black woman telling me how to behave. Catherine felt not only the personal insult, but also the blatant discrimination in every word Ethan spoke. Yet she remained calm, her eyes fixed on him, sending a silent message that she would not be easily intimidated. Around them, several customers stopped to watch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Some began quietly recording the scene on their phones, but no one dared to intervene. The atmosphere in the supermarket grew tense, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Ethan continued, his voice growing louder as he deliberately sought attention. You think you're so impressive, don't you? Don't forget, you're just an ordinary person. No, an ordinary woman. You have no right to talk to me like that. If you're smart, you'll stay out of big matters. Women like you should know their place. Ethan's prejudiced words caused some in the crowd to shake their heads in discomfort, though none spoke up. Catherine, though she could feel anger rising within her, maintained her composure. She knew losing control would only make things worse. She stepped forward, her sharp gaze acting as an unspoken warning. In a steady but commanding voice, she replied, I'm trying to remind you politely, but you've gone too far. I'm warning you, if you continue using offensive and discriminatory language, you'll be held accountable under the law. Ethan burst out laughing, his voice echoing through the now quiet supermarket. The law? Are you kidding me? I am the law. What are you going to do about it? File a complaint? Call the store manager. Listen, women like you shouldn't create trouble for themselves. His words only heightened the tension in the supermarket. Catherine stood motionless, her gaze piercing through his arrogance. Some in the crowd murmured disapproval of Ethan's actions, but he seemed unfazed. On the contrary, his aggressive demeanor intensified as he tried to overwhelm Catherine with his hostility. But Catherine, with the experience of a military officer who had faced far greater challenges, remained unshaken. She looked directly at Ethan, her voice firm and resolute. You think you're above the law, but let me tell you this, no one is. Your actions and words aren't just an insult to me, they disgrace the uniform you're wearing. You should think carefully before going any further. Instead of backing down, Ethan grew angrier. He stepped closer to Catherine, his voice lowering into a threatening tone. Don't think I'll be scared by your empty threats. I suggest you leave now before this gets worse." Catherine didn't move, her gaze unwavering. Her calm and determination were a silent declaration that she would not bow to injustice. The crowd around them was no longer just filming. Whispers and murmurs suggested they sensed something bigger was about to unfold. The atmosphere in the supermarket grew increasingly stifling. Ethan stood opposite Catherine, his gaze filled with arrogance as if he believed he had complete control of the situation. However, Catherine's unwavering composure unsettled him in a way he refused to acknowledge. At that moment, another man in a police uniform entered the aisle. It was Martin Hayes, Ethan's colleague. Taller and seemingly more composed than Ethan, Martin's eyes showed a flash of caution as he took in the scene before him. He quickly approached, his gaze moving from Catherine to Ethan. "Ethan, what's going on here?" Martin asked, his voice low but not entirely neutral. Ethan turned as if finding the ally he had been hoping for. He immediately gestured toward Catherine, his voice laced with irritation. "What's going on? She's causing trouble, acting like she has the right to lecture me. I told her to leave, but she's just standing there." Martin frowned slightly, glancing at Catherine. Instead of responding immediately, he moved closer to Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder as if to defuse the situation. However, his gesture left his intentions ambiguous. Was he trying to help Ethan avoid trouble, or merely to calm things down? In a low voice, Martin said, just loud enough for Ethan to hear, "Ethan, are you sure you're handling this the right way? I get that you're angry, but don't let your emotions take over. We're police officers. Every action we take carries responsibility." Ethan shot Martin an irritated look. "Don't interfere, Martin. I know what I'm doing." Martin took a step back, his expression growing more serious. He turned to Catherine, his voice measured. "You have the right to speak, but I think we should resolve this calmly. As police officers, we won't overlook inappropriate actions, but I also ask that you not escalate this further." Catherine studied Martin closely, as though trying to discern his true intentions. She responded, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm not escalating anything. I just want to ensure that everyone's rights and fairness are respected, including those who wear a police uniform." Martin paused, seemingly deep in thought. He glanced back at Ethan, clearly noticing his colleague's stubbornness and uncontrolled behavior. A flicker of conflict crossed Martin's face. He wanted to protect his colleague, but also recognized that Ethan had gone too far. Catherine, meanwhile, maintained her sharp gaze and upright posture, unshaken by the arrival of a second officer. She understood that Martin's presence would complicate things, but also saw that he might not be like Ethan. Deciding to stay composed, she observed their actions. Martin addressed Catherine again, his tone more conciliatory, but still carrying a hint of authority. "Listen, ma'am, I think this is all a misunderstanding, but it would be best if you left. We don't want this to escalate further." Catherine raised an eyebrow, her eyes locked on Martin. Her voice, steady but firm, echoed through the aisle. "Misunderstanding? If you think Ethan's discriminatory remarks and abuse of power are just a misunderstanding, then you need to rethink your position. I'm not leaving just because you're uncomfortable facing the truth." Martin flinched slightly at Catherine's response, but quickly regained his composure. Leaning slightly to block Catherine's view of Ethan, he spoke softly to his colleague. "Ethan, let's end this here. Don't make it worse." But Ethan, fueled by his inflated ego and unresolved anger, refused to listen. He shrugged Martin's hand off and stepped forward, directly confronting Catherine. His voice grew louder and more confrontational. "Listen, you don't have the right to stand here arguing with me. This isn't the place for you to make a scene. I told you to leave, and I won't say it again. Catherine, now facing both officers, didn't back down. She knew her actions and words were not just for herself, but for the silent onlookers around them. With a stronger voice, she responded, "You're wearing a uniform that represents the law, but you're not acting by your responsibilities. If you continue to threaten me, you'll face not just me, but legal consequences as well." Martin, clearly sensing the situation spiraling out of control, raised his hands in an attempt to intervene. "Both of you, please calm down. Catherine, I understand you feel insulted, but this isn't the best way to handle it. Let us take care of this." Catherine turned to Martin, her gaze sharp as a blade, her voice, cold and certain, cut through the tension. "Take care of this? You've already abused your power to threaten me right here, in front of everyone. This isn't something you get to take care of. This is about fairness and accountability." Martin hesitated, visibly conflicted by Catherine's unwavering stance, but Ethan seemed entirely unaffected. He smirked, stepping closer to Catherine, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can beat me? Don't forget, I'm the police. I decide what happens here." The tension in the supermarket thickened. The crowd murmured, with some quietly retreating while others continued filming. This had escalated far beyond a simple argument, and Catherine knew she needed to be ready for what was coming next. The atmosphere in the supermarket was taut as a bowstring. Ethan, pushed to his limits by Catherine's unshakable composure, suddenly lost control. His eyes blazed with anger, his wounded ego, and the feeling of his authority being challenged. In a fleeting yet perilous moment, he reached down to his belt, drew his gun from its holster, and pointed it directly at Catherine. The entire supermarket fell into utter silence. The sound of the gun being drawn and the startled screams of a few customers shattered the already suffocating atmosphere. Some people quickly backed away, while others stood frozen in place, their eyes wide with horror. Suddenly, a voice rang out, breaking the tense silence. "Ethan, put the gun down immediately. You're out of line." All eyes turned toward a woman in a store employee's uniform. It was Angela, the supermarket manager, who had once served in the military and was now a critical eyewitness to the entire situation. She stepped out from behind the shelves, her voice commanding yet calm. "I saw everything from start to finish. Catherine hasn't caused any trouble. You're the one who's taken this way too far." Angela stepped closer, her piercing gaze fixed on Ethan. "And if you keep this up, I'll testify to ensure that not only will you lose your job, but you'll also face legal consequences." Ethan, still holding the gun, shouted angrily, his voice trembling but trying to maintain authority. "This is your final warning. Are you leaving or not? I don't want to escalate this, but don't force my hand." Catherine stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. Her calmness wasn't because she underestimated the danger, but because she was accustomed to facing far greater threats on the battlefield. With years of experience, Catherine knew that any rash reaction could escalate the situation further. Seizing the opportunity created by Angela's sudden appearance, Catherine acted. She took a slow step forward, her voice firm and decisive. "Ethan, you're not just facing me. You're facing an undeniable truth. If you have any sense left, put the gun down and stop before this becomes irreparable." Ethan hesitated, his eyes flickering between Catherine and Angela. The gun in his hand trembled slightly, a clear sign of his uncertainty. Though he desperately tried to maintain his aura of authority, he couldn't conceal his unease. Ethan suddenly realized that everyone around him was recording, documenting his every action and word. The weight of the crowd's gaze and Catherine's unyielding stance pressed heavily on him. Amid the heightened tension, an unexpected voice called out from behind the crowd. "Ethan, put the gun down now!" A veteran stepped forward from the gathering, his frame solid and his eyes resolute. Standing tall with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze bore into Ethan as if trying to pierce through his stubbornness. Officer Ethan, I've stood in trenches defending this country. I've watched comrades lay down their lives for the values this uniform represents. But what I'm witnessing here today is a betrayal of those values. Ethan's hands trembled slightly, but he tried to appear resolute. You don't understand what's happening here. This isn't your business. The veteran remained steadfast. He took another step forward, his voice firm and commanding. If you truly understood the meaning of the uniform you're wearing, you wouldn't need me to remind you. Put the gun down before you do something you can't undo. This is advice from someone who understands loss all too well. The veteran's words cut through Ethan's ego like a knife. The crowd, which had been silently observing, began to murmur. Some people quietly nodded in agreement, emboldened by the veteran's words. Catherine, too, regarded the man with deep respect in her eyes. "Thank you, sir." Catherine finally broke her silence, her voice steady and sincere. "You've shown that courage isn't just about wearing a uniform, but about standing up for justice, no matter the circumstances." The veteran turned to Catherine and gave a respectful nod. "It's people like you who give me hope for the future of this country." All eyes turned to the man who had just spoken. He was a middle-aged man with a sturdy build, silver hair, and piercing eyes. Though dressed in everyday clothes, his strong and resolute demeanor commanded attention. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice tinged with a slight tremor, though he kept his gun pointed at Catherine. The man stepped forward, completely unafraid. His voice was steady but carried a booming authority. "I'm a veteran, and you're disgracing everyone who has ever worn a uniform, including your own. Put the gun down now, or I'll ensure you're disarmed right here." Ethan's eyes flickered with unease. Facing Catherine had been pressure enough, but now another strong figure had risen against him. The crowd, emboldened by the veteran's presence, began murmuring louder. Some called for the police, while others voiced their support for Catherine and the veteran. Catherine seized the moment. Her voice rang out, stronger and more commanding than ever. "Ethan, listen to me. No one here is against you, but you're destroying yourself. Put the gun down before this goes too far. This is no longer a personal matter. It's about your responsibility to the uniform you wear." Her gaze locked on Ethan's, sharp and penetrating as if she could see straight into his soul. Her voice dropped to a lower, weightier tone. "Ethan, do you know what's scarier than losing control? It's when your past comes back to judge you. You were rejected by the military, weren't you? I can see it in the way you speak, in the way you resent people like me, people who survived and succeeded in the very environment where you failed." Her words cut into Ethan like a sharp blade. He instinctively stepped back, his eyes wide with panic. "You don't know anything about me. Don't stand there pretending you understand me," he shouted, but his voice had lost its conviction. Catherine took a step forward, maintaining her steady pressure. "I don't need to pretend, Ethan. I know what rejection feels like. But instead of fixing yourself, you chose to blame others and abuse your power. That's why you'll never truly deserve the uniform you wear. You failed in the past, and you're failing right now, in front of everyone." Ethan froze in place, her words striking deep. The gun in his hand trembled, a clear sign that his confidence was crumbling. Around them, the crowd murmured more loudly, with some openly expressing outrage at Ethan's behavior. Ethan hesitated. His eyes betrayed a storm of emotions: anger, a wounded ego, and now genuine fear. He knew that continuing down this path would bring consequences, far beyond his control. Yet his stubbornness and pride made it hard for him to back down in front of the crowd. The veteran stepped closer, his gaze cold and unyielding. His voice was firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. "This isn't a battlefield. No one here is threatening you. But if you don't lower your gun, I'll consider you a genuine threat." The supermarket seemed to collectively hold its breath, waiting for Ethan's next move. Catherine maintained her icy gaze, showing no fear despite the gravity of the situation. At that moment, Ethan took a shaky step back, his hands trembling. Though the gun was still in his grip, it was clear he was losing control. At that moment, another figure emerged from the crowd. It was an older man with silver hair and a solid, commanding presence. William, a veteran who had served in foreign wars. He stepped forward, positioning himself firmly between Ethan and Catherine. His eyes burned with resolve. "Ethan, put the gun down now," William demanded, his voice strong and resolute. "I serve to protect this country, not to see a police officer destroy the values we fought for." William turned to the crowd, his voice rising to rally them. "We can't stay silent any longer. This isn't just about Catherine. It's about the justice we all deserve." William's words ignited the spirit of the crowd. Some quietly stepped forward, forming a line between Ethan and Catherine. The murmurs of disapproval grew louder, adding mounting pressure on Ethan. Faced with the unyielding gazes of Catherine, Angela, and William, Ethan's fear became palpable. His grip on the gun loosened, and finally he was forced to drop it to the ground. The tension in the supermarket remained suffocating, but Catherine stood tall amidst the watchful crowd, unwavering. The gun in Ethan's hand trembled slightly, mirroring the turmoil rising within him. At that moment, Catherine knew she needed to do something to completely shift the dynamic. Slowly, without breaking eye contact with Ethan, Catherine reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She moved deliberately, her gaze as sharp as ever, silently telling Ethan she was fully in control. This only made Ethan more impatient. "What the hell are you doing?" Ethan roared, his voice tinged with both anger and anxiety. "Don't think I'll let you call someone to rescue you. Put the phone away or you'll do what, Ethan?" Catherine interrupted, her voice steady but filled with authority. "Pull the trigger in front of all these witnesses, or do something even more foolish to destroy your career. I suggest you stay silent and watch how this ends." Without waiting for a response, Catherine calmly swiped across her screen and selected a familiar number, one she knew would answer immediately. Within seconds, a deep, composed voice came through on the other end. "David Grant speaking." "Catherine, is something wrong?" Still locking eyes with Ethan, Catherine spoke firmly, her voice neither loud nor soft. "David, I need you at Greenway Supermarket immediately. The situation here is serious and I need your intervention." Ethan narrowed his eyes, his face hardening as he heard the name David Grant. He stammered, his voice now laced with disbelief. "David Grant? Do you mean the mayor? Don't kid yourself. You think I'm going to believe you know the mayor? Stop playing games. I've met plenty of people like you, always thinking they're more important than they are." Catherine didn't dignify Ethan's mockery with a response. Instead, she continued her conversation calmly, as if Ethan's presence were insignificant. "Thank you, David. I know you won't keep me waiting," she said, ending the call. Ethan burst out laughing, his laughter echoing through the already heavy air. "Ridiculous," he scoffed. "You think a fake phone call's gonna make me back down? A woman like you, standing here with delusions of grandeur. Don't forget who I am, Catherine. I'm the police. I have the authority to remove you from here right now." Catherine kept her sharp gaze on him, unmoved by his insults. Slowly, she slipped her phone back into her pocket, her confident demeanor unsettling Ethan. "You're wrong, Ethan," she said, her voice low but weighted with conviction. "You're not the only one with authority here, and you're about to learn that no one is above the law, not even you." The crowd, once passive observers, began to murmur. The mention of Mayor David Grant had piqued their interest. Some customers took out their phones to call the police or inform the media. The atmosphere buzzed with the anticipation of something significant about to unfold. Ethan, despite his attempts to maintain a hardened expression, couldn't hide his unease. His eyes darted around, betraying his growing awareness that he was losing control. Instead of stopping to reconsider, however, he pushed himself further into a dangerous corner. "The mayor isn't coming," Ethan growled, his voice laced with anger as though masking his fear. "And even if he does, there's nothing he can do to me. I'm the law here, and I take orders from no one, least of all you." Catherine said nothing more. She stood motionless, her gaze steady and full of defiance, waiting for the moment when Ethan would have to face the true consequences of his actions. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun, his fingers trembling slightly as Catherine's piercing gaze cut through his arrogant words. A few heavy seconds of silence passed, and the hesitation in Ethan's actions became increasingly apparent. He tried to mask it with a smirk, but the unstable look in his eyes betrayed him. One of the nearby customers, keeping their voice low, whispered to the person next to them, "He's losing control. He doesn't look like a professional cop at all." Though whispered, those words seemed to echo loudly in Ethan's ears. Memories from his past surged back like waves crashing against his already unstable mind. It was a moment he had never wanted to revisit, but now the images played vividly before him. Years ago, Ethan had been a young man filled with ambition and dreams of serving in the military. He applied to the armed forces with the hope of proving himself and earning the recognition he had always felt was missing in his life. But things hadn't gone as he'd hoped. During the selection process, Ethan was quickly eliminated. Not due to a lack of physical ability, but because of his lack of discipline and patience, two essential qualities the military demanded. Recruitment officers had noted that he was too impulsive, easily swayed by personal emotions, and incapable of adhering to strict rules. That rejection didn't just shatter Ethan's dreams, it left a deep emotional scar. He could never forget the look in the commander's eyes on that day, disappointment, mixed with resolute judgment, as if silently declaring that Ethan wasn't worthy of standing among those who protected the country. Ethan left the recruitment center with a heavy heart and a deeply wounded ego. But instead of accepting failure and working to improve himself, he chose to assign blame. In his mind, he developed an irrational hatred for the military, particularly for those who succeeded in the very environment where he had been rejected. He saw them as arrogant, always thinking they were superior to others. Back in the present, Ethan stared at Catherine, the woman standing there, unflinching even with a gun pointed at her. Her confident, resolute gaze reminded him of the commander's eyes from years ago, the eyes he had tried so hard to forget. "You think you're so great, don't you?" Ethan growled, but deep down he felt the wavering in his mind. "You think you have the right to stand here and lecture me like you're better than me." Ethan didn't even realize that his voice had lost its certainty. The feeling of being challenged by Catherine, someone who seemed to embody everything he had failed to achieve, drove him further into a spiral. Yet, deep within, a small voice of reason pleaded with him to back down. For a fleeting moment, Ethan's gaze swept over the crowd. He saw the horror, the disappointment, and even the disdain in the eyes of those watching. It reminded him why he had joined the police force, to prove that he, too, could wield power, that he, too, mattered. But now that power was slipping away from him. In a brief moment of clarity, Ethan lowered the gun slightly, as if reason was beginning to win. Yet the challenge in Catherine's eyes reignited his sense of being threatened. His ego was too big to admit fault, too big to accept that he had gone too far. Grinding his teeth, Ethan raised the gun again, his voice faltering. "Don't act like you're here to give me orders. I don't need anyone telling me what to do." Catherine noticed the hesitation in Ethan's every word and movement. She didn't respond immediately, instead maintaining her steady gaze as though giving him time to reflect. But she also knew that without timely intervention, Ethan might push the situation into irreparable territory. The tension in the supermarket lingered, but a sound from outside broke through the silence. The wail of car sirens and the hurried steps of many feet. Suddenly, the supermarket doors swung open, and a group of people entered, led by a tall man with an authoritative presence. It was Mayor David Grant, known for his fairness and unwavering commitment to justice. The mayor's gaze immediately swept across the scene. He saw Catherine standing firm and composed, facing Ethan, who clutched the gun in his trembling hand. The crowd, previously chaotic and anxious, fell silent, their eyes turning toward the man who had just entered. "Catherine, are you all right?" David Grant asked, his deep, resonant voice breaking the oppressive tension. Hearing the familiar voice, Catherine nodded, her eyes still fixed on Ethan. "I'm fine, David, but this situation needs to be resolved immediately." The mayor's simple but weighty statement left the crowd in awe. Murmurs spread among the onlookers. "Catherine? Who is she that the mayor knows her?" One customer, who had been recording the scene from the beginning, whispered, "I heard Catherine is a colonel in the army. She's not just an ordinary person." The information quickly circulated, and the crowd's mood shifted from surprise to admiration. Their gazes toward Catherine transformed, reflecting respect instead of mere curiosity. Ethan, struggling to maintain his composure, couldn't ignore the shift in the atmosphere. The mayor's arrival struck a heavy blow to his pride. He stared at David Grant, his face betraying unease, though he tried to mask it with arrogance. "Mayor, I'm just doing my job," Ethan said, his voice wavering slightly. "This woman is causing a disturbance, and I'm trying to control the situation. It's just a small misunderstanding." David Grant stepped closer, his sharp eyes fixed on Ethan. Without saying a word, the mayor glanced at the gun still gripped in Ethan's hand. At that moment, Ethan froze. His grip on the gun tightened, but his entire body trembled as though he didn't know what to do next. "A small misunderstanding?" The mayor's voice rang out, calm yet commanding. "Ethan Collins, you're pointing a gun at a colonel in the army of this country. Do you think that's a small misunderstanding?" Ethan stammered, caught off guard by the mayor's words. "Mayor, I didn't know. She's not in uniform. How was I supposed to know who she was? She challenged me, and I had to act to maintain order." Catherine remained silent, letting the mayor take charge of the situation. Her unyielding gaze bore into Ethan, further unsettling him. After listening to Ethan's excuses, David Grant slowly shook his head, his expression heavy with disappointment. "Do you know what's most troubling about this situation, Ethan?" the mayor asked, his voice slow and deliberate, laden with pressure. "It's not that you didn't know who Catherine is. It's that, even without knowing, you chose to abuse your power instead of demonstrating the responsibility and ethics required by the uniform you wear." The mayor's words seemed to ripple through the entire supermarket. The crowd began murmuring again, with many nodding in agreement. Some customers even openly voiced their disapproval of Ethan's actions. Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Despite his attempts to appear composed, the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Yet, rather than admit his mistakes, he clung to the remnants of his authority. "Mayor, I think you're misunderstanding," Ethan said, grasping for justification. "I was just trying to ensure everyone's safety. If I went a little too far, it's because the situation was very tense." David Grant didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to Catherine, his gaze softening slightly. "Catherine, how would you like me to handle this?" Catherine offered a faint smile, one imbued with confidence and strength. "David, I trust your sense of justice, but you know as well as I do that actions must come with accountability." The mayor nodded, his expression turning steely as he faced Ethan once more. At that moment, Ethan knew there was no way out for him. Martin Hayes, Ethan's colleague, who had been standing nearby, finally broke his silence. His face was tight with tension as he stepped forward and spoke clearly. "Ethan, that's enough. We've gone too far. I can't stand by and let you continue to disgrace the force. Your actions don't represent us, those of us who became police officers to uphold justice, not abuse it." Martin's words landed like a bombshell. The crowd fell silent, clearly stunned by his stance. Even Ethan was taken aback, his eyes widening as he stared at Martin in disbelief. "Martin, what are you doing? You're supposed to be on my side," Ethan roared, desperately trying to regain control. Martin held his ground, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I won't stand on the side of wrong, Ethan. If you keep this up, you won't just lose your career. You'll destroy the trust people have in us. I can't let that happen." The tense silence in the supermarket was broken as Mayor David Grant slowly surveyed the crowd, his eyes scanning each face with measured scrutiny. He knew that the situation had to be resolved here and now, not with mere words, but with undeniable truth. "Excuse me, but I need some cooperation from everyone," he said, his deep, commanding voice cutting through the tension. "I've noticed some of you have been recording the incident from the beginning. Could someone share the footage with me? This is crucial evidence." The crowd murmured among themselves, some casting hesitant glances at one another. After a moment's hesitation, a young woman stepped forward, holding her phone in her trembling hand. "Mr. Mayor, I recorded everything from the start. I think you should see it." David Grant nodded, his expression softening slightly in gratitude for her courage. He took the phone and began reviewing the footage alongside Catherine. Every word, every action of Ethan's was captured clearly, from his insults toward Catherine, his discriminatory remarks, to the moment he drew his gun, crossing every boundary of ethics and responsibility. As the video was shown to the crowd, Ethan's defense began to crumble. He stammered, his voice losing its steadiness. "Mayor, this is just a misunderstanding. The video doesn't capture the full context. She provoked me first. I had no choice but to act to control the situation." David Grant lifted his head, his sharp eyes boring into Ethan. "You believe this was an attempt to control the situation? Ethan, all I see in this video is an abuse of power by an officer who has no business wearing that uniform." Ethan broke into a sweat, scrambling to justify himself. "But, Mayor, I didn't know she was a colonel in the Army. If I'd known, things would have been different." Ethan's excuse only fueled the crowd's anger. A voice rang out from the throng. "It doesn't matter if she's a colonel or not. You don't have the right to treat anyone that way." Catherine, who had remained silent to let the mayor address the situation, now stepped forward. Her gaze was icy, and her voice rang out with authority. "Ethan, this isn't about you not knowing who I am. I could be a colonel, or I could be an ordinary citizen. It doesn't matter. What matters are your actions, Your discriminatory attitude, your abuse of power, and your lack of responsibility. They have tarnished the image of the entire police force." She stared directly at Ethan, her words cutting through his excuses like a blade. "When you put on that uniform, you represent the law and justice. But what you've done today doesn't just betray those values. It betrays the trust of the community. You haven't just insulted me. You've insulted everyone watching who hopes for fairness and accountability." Catherine's words ignited the crowd. Murmurs turned into vocal expressions of outrage. A middle-aged man shouted, "Cops like him are the reason people don't trust the system anymore." Ethan was now cornered. Catherine's powerful statements, the irrefutable video evidence, and the mayor's disappointed gaze left him with no escape. The sense of power he once thought he held was now completely shattered. David Grant turned to the two other police officers who had arrived at the scene. Pointing at Ethan, he issued a firm order. "Disarm him immediately. I will ensure he's suspended and that a full investigation is launched. This abuse of power is unacceptable." The officers stepped forward and removed the gun from Ethan's trembling hands. For the first time, Ethan remained silent, his face blank with shock and defeat. He had lost his authority, his respect, and now, his position. When the gun was taken from Ethan's hand, the entire atmosphere in the supermarket shifted. The oppressive tension gave way to a palpable sense of relief and solidarity among the crowd. Yet all eyes remained on Ethan, who stood frozen in place, his face rigid, as if unable to believe what had just happened. Mayor David Grant, his gaze cold and unyielding, turned to the two assisting officers and gave a firm order. "Arrest Ethan Collins immediately. From this moment, he is suspended from duty. I will personally ensure a full investigation is conducted to address every one of his wrongdoings." Hearing these words, Ethan seemed to snap out of his stunned state. He suddenly wrenched his arm away from one of the officers escorting him and shouted, "No, you can't do this to me. I'm a police officer. I was doing my job. This is a misunderstanding. I have rights, and no one can take them from me." The panic in Ethan's voice and actions was evident. He struggled, desperately trying to reclaim the authority he had lost. But his resistance only worsened the situation. The two officers swiftly pinned him to the ground, handcuffing him as the crowd looked on. For what felt like an eternity, Ethan lay face down on the floor, utterly powerless. "Let me go!" he continued to scream, his voice now breaking under the weight of his panic. "I'm an officer of the law. You can't treat me like this." The crowd, which had been silently observing, began to applaud. The clapping spread like a wave, accompanied by shouts of agreement. "That's right. Justice needs to be served. It's time people like him pay for abusing their power." An elderly woman in the crowd, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, her eyes shining. "Colonel Catherine, thank you. We need people like you to stand up for justice." Catherine nodded lightly to the woman but kept her gaze fixed on Ethan. Even as he was subdued, there was no triumph in her expression. Instead, her eyes revealed a deep disappointment, not just in Ethan, but in the system that had allowed behavior like his to persist. As Ethan was led away, the crowd parted to make way. Some bowed their heads, murmuring to one another in admiration of how Catherine had handled the situation. Others approached Mayor Grant, urging him to implement reforms to prevent such abuses of power in the future. David Grant, still bearing his serious demeanor, turned to Catherine. His voice was low but filled with gratitude. "Catherine, you've taught us an important lesson today. Your courage not only protected yourself, but also rekindled faith in justice within this community." Catherine offered a small smile, her voice calm. David, this isn't about me. It's about the responsibility and trust we need to restore, not just in the police force, but in the entire system. Justice isn't just something we talk about, it's something we must uphold." As Ethan was escorted out of the supermarket, the murmurs in the crowd continued. Some people kept recording videos intent on preserving the moment they felt justice had prevailed. Catherine stood tall, her posture resolute, her eyes calm yet filled with determination. She knew that Ethan's arrest was only the first step in a longer journey toward meaningful change. But, at this moment at least, she had proven that no one is above the law, not even those who hold power in their hands. When Ethan was escorted away, the atmosphere in the supermarket began to lighten, though the weight of the incident still lingered. The crowd remained gathered, their eyes fixed on Catherine and Mayor David Grant. It was as though they were waiting for an explanation, a conclusion what they had just witnessed. David Grant stepped forward, facing the crowd. Adjusting his tie and taking a deep breath, he spoke with a voice that was both warm and resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to extend my sincerest apologies to everyone here today. The misconduct of Ethan Collins, a police officer representing the force meant to uphold the law, is inexcusable. But this is not just his failure. It reflects flaws and shortcomings within the system, a system I, as your mayor, am responsible for improving." He turned to Catherine, his eyes filled with respect. "Catherine, I owe you a special apology. As someone who has dedicated her life to protecting this country, you should never have had to endure such disrespect, especially from someone who should have been protecting you." Catherine nodded silently, her eyes softening briefly. Yet, instead of simply accepting the apology, she decided to use this moment as a larger lesson. Stepping forward, Catherine turned to the mayor and then to the crowd. Her voice rang out clear and strong, every word resonating deeply with those listening. "Thank you, David, but an apology is not enough. Today's events are not just about a single officer abusing his power. They are a reminder that the system we trust to uphold justice is riddled with gaps. This system cannot function effectively if it is upheld by individuals who lack responsibility and ethics." She turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her, her tone softening slightly. "Today, I did not stand here just to defend my honor. I stood to remind all of us that anyone has the right to speak out against injustice. We cannot change the world by staying silent, but we can begin by demanding fairness and accountability from those tasked with protecting us." A round of applause erupted from the crowd, building into a wave of agreement. Catherine's words were more than a statement. They were a call to action, awakening a sense of collective responsibility among those present. The events at the supermarket quickly spread across social media. Videos capturing the entire ordeal became the center of attention, garnering millions of views and shares within hours. Thousands of comments poured in from across the country, expressing support for Catherine, outrage at Ethan's actions, and a rallying cry for meaningful reform in policing. But the story didn't end there. Human rights organizations and social activists seized on the incident as a case study to spark conversations about accountability and transparency in law enforcement. Conferences and awareness campaigns were organized, all inspired by Catherine's bravery and steadfastness. Although Catherine herself had no intention of seeking fame, the media began referring to her as a symbol of justice. To her, however, such titles were far less important than knowing she had done the right thing. She quietly returned to her work, continuing to serve her country as she had throughout her career. Mayor David Grant, galvanized by the events, initiated sweeping reforms in the local police department. He pledged stricter training protocols and closer oversight to ensure that no one would abuse their power again. For Catherine, what happened at the supermarket was not just a personal confrontation. It was a pivotal moment that proved change is possible, if one dares to stand up against injustice. She knew the journey ahead would be long, but she also knew it was worth it. David Grant didn't stop at promises. He organized a series of community meetings, actively listening to concerns from residents directly affected by abuses of power. These gatherings became a crucial bridge between the public and local authorities, helping to rebuild trust that had been eroded. In addition, Grant unveiled a comprehensive police reform plan, including mandatory ethical and accountability training programs and the implementation of surveillance technology to ensure transparency in law enforcement. A portion of the city's budget was allocated to establish an independent oversight committee tasked with monitoring police activities and addressing citizen complaints. Catherine's story and her courage became an inspiration to millions, not just to stand against wrongdoing, but to believe that justice can prevail as long as we refuse to abandon it. After the supermarket incident, nothing was the same. Ethan Collins, once arrogant and dismissive of responsibility, now faced a harsh reality. Mayor David Grant's decision was executed immediately. Ethan was dismissed from the police force, and his file was sent to investigative authorities to probe his past misconduct. The investigation revealed that Ethan's behavior was not an isolated incident. He had a history of abusive actions and comments which had been shielded by certain colleagues. However, nothing could remain hidden now. Ethan was charged not only for the supermarket incident, but also for prior violations. As media coverage spread, Ethan seemed to vanish from public view. Those who had known him described him as someone with potential, but whose inflated ego and lack of discipline had led to his inevitable downfall. Ethan's journey became a painful lesson, not only for him but for those around him. Mayor David Grant, staying true to his word, initiated sweeping reforms in the police force. He established stricter standards for ethics and conduct, including mandatory periodic training programs to enhance accountability and transparency. An independent oversight committee was created, consisting of legal experts, social activists, and community representatives. Their mission was to ensure that those who wore the police uniform truly deserved the public's trust. These measures not only helped restore the community's faith in law enforcement, but also created an environment where ethical and responsible officers could thrive. As for Catherine, she did not let the public attention distract her. Although her courage during the incident spread widely across the media, turning her into a symbol of justice, she refused to be swept up by the unintended fame. She returned to her role in the military, where she felt she truly belonged, continuing to lead and train young soldiers. For Catherine, the challenges she faced in the supermarket were just a small part of a greater mission: to uphold justice and serve her community. As Catherine prepared to leave the supermarket that day, a middle-aged customer, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, approached her. His eyes were reflective and his voice was deep yet sincere. "Colonel Catherine, I stayed silent during the incident. I didn't speak up because I thought I couldn't make a difference, but watching you, I realized we can't stand by in the face of injustice. You taught me and everyone here an important lesson. Sometimes, even a small act of courage can create significant change." Catherine smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder, and replied, "It's never too late to stand up. Your actions today, even if it was just listening and witnessing, contributed to this change. Keep sharing that inspiration with those around you." The man nodded, his eyes lighting up with hope. It was a small yet powerful moment, a spark in the darkness, affirming that anyone can be a catalyst for change. Catherine's story was more than just a confrontation in a supermarket. It became a powerful reminder that justice and accountability are not abstract concepts but values we all have a role in building. Following the supermarket incident, the local community awakened to injustices they had previously overlooked. Many witnesses came forward to share their stories, affirming that there was no place for silence in the face of misconduct. On social media, posts and comments flooded in, encouraging others to speak up when witnessing abuses of power. One customer who had recorded the entire event organized an online forum, inviting people to discuss ways to build a fairer society. Many participants expressed feeling a greater sense of responsibility to uphold justice, not just with words, but through tangible actions. The police reforms initiated by Mayor Grant began to show positive effects, and the community grew more aware of their role in safeguarding justice. For Catherine, her journey had never been about fame, but through this event she realized her actions had sparked hope in many hearts. As the light of change began to shine brighter, the story concluded with an open future, one where everyone worked together to create a more just and equitable community. The story of Catherine Miller was more than a mere supermarket confrontation. It was a testament to the power of courage, steadfastness, and belief in justice. Through her story, we are reminded that every action, no matter how small, can create significant change when we stand up for what is right. What do you think of how Catherine handled the situation? What would you do in a similar circumstance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like and share it to spread this powerful message. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.